What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the first edition of the Smackdown Stew Report right here on YouTube. I have done as I have promised, the first Smackdown Stew Report, first of many, and I've decided to go live for the first episode. But just to get the kinks out, I will continue to go live, and those of you who missed it can watch it right here on YouTube on the Smackdown Stew YouTube channel. And welcome to the Smackdown Stew YouTube channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the Smackdown Stew YouTube channel for updates and everything. You can chat with me in the chat. I will read your comments if they are appropriate and if we have time and if I enjoy the comments. So today on the Smackdown Stew Report, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about kayfabe, the meaning of kayfabe, which the wrestlers lived back in the day, because this is your channel for old school wrestling. We're going to look at some of the territories when wrestling had territories, when the NWA was formed and the territories joined the National Wrestling Alliance. We'll also take a look at the 25 top territories. And also we will pay tribute, as you know from my update and probably heard, the homicidal, genocidal, suicidal, death-defying Sabu. The great Sabu passed away over the weekend at the age of 60. So we will pay tribute to the life and the times of the great Sabu. So we're going to get things started right now with kayfabe and the meaning of kayfabe. So kayfabe, the definition of kayfabe, when you look it up, is that kayfabe is used in professional wrestling to refer to the portrayal of staged events within the industry as real or true, specifically competition, rivalries, and relationships between participants. The term has evolved to become a code word of sorts for maintaining this reality within the direct or indirect presence of the general public. So, allow me to explain kayfabe. So, that's the definition. It's the code that the professional wrestlers lived by day in and day out to keep the business a secret. Examples: wrestlers back in those days weren't allowed to like the heels, which are the good guys, and the baby faces, which were the bad guys. No, sorry. My mistake. It was the reverse. It was the heels were the bad guys, and the baby faces, good guys, were not allowed to travel together. They weren't allowed to stay in the same hotels. They were in different locker rooms on either side of the arena to create the illusion that they were really enemies. So, and that was the code. You know, there were many incidents, wrestlers protecting kayfabe. Don't go on a talk show or have a wrestler on a talk show and to ask him if the wrestling business is fake. You didn't do that, and you still shouldn't do that. Back in the day, Hulk Hogan had a conflict with Richard Belzer, who we'll be back. All right. Anyway, this is live. We're getting the kinks out. So as I was saying, the heels, the bad guys, the faces, the good guys were not allowed to travel together, stay in the same hotels. They weren't allowed to hang out anywhere around the general public. Their locker rooms were on either side of the arena to protect the business, to create the illusion that they were enemies. And a lot of the times it worked. And if you defied that code, you could be fined or fired. Like in certain examples that I will tell you about, there was an instance where Hacksaw Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik, who are kayfabe bitter enemies, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, the ho, American flag waving, pro-American, and the Iron Sheik, the greatest heel anti-American, America. Pew! So what happened was the Sheik couldn't get a car, and Hacksaw Jim Duggan offered to drive with him to the arena. And of course, the Iron Sheik stopped because he wanted to get drugs. They were stopped and they made the news. But that was not the reason for their punishment and for the consequences. It made the newspaper that the Iron Sheik and Hacksaw Jim Duggan were in a car together and they were arrested on drug charges. But the main thing was they broke kayfabe, because the fact that it made the news that a ultimate good guy, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who was feuding with the ultimate bad guy, the Iron Sheik, were in a car driving together like they were friends. They both broke kayfabe and they were both fired by the WWE. Of course, the Sheik was brought back as General Adnan's and Sergeant Slaughter's Colonel Mustafa, and eventually Hacksaw Jim Duggan resurfaced. That's one example. And yeah, they really protected the business. If you look at the Andre the Giant documentary, it shows somebody with a camera coming into the locker room, and Andre got up and was going to chase after the guy. He said, "Get the F out. You can't be in here." And a last example of how wrestlers protected kayfabe, Tim White, the late Tim White, the referee and the man who traveled for years with Andre the Giant, when he first broke into the business, he went into the locker room and sat down. And Andre the Giant says, "Get out! You're not allowed here." And Tim White says, "I'm one of you. I work with you guys. I'm one of you." And Andre was playing cards, I believe, with Dino Bravo at the time. And Dino Bravo put his head down because he knew what was coming. Andre got up, pushed the table, and when Timmy White saw how big Andre was, he ran out of the locker room. So that's kayfabe. So when I refer to kayfabe, it's the code that the wrestlers live by to protect the business. And it'll come up a lot. When we discuss the Click, that infamous Madison Square Garden break of kayfabe where Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were going to WCW, and they had a big hug in the ring with Shawn Michaels and Triple H. And then Triple H is the one that took the punishment because you couldn't punish Hall or Nash because they were already gone. It was their last day to WCW. Shawn Michaels was the World Heavyweight Champion, the WWE Champion at the time, so you couldn't punish him. So Triple H got the punishment. He was supposed to win the 1996 King of the Ring. Yeah, he was supposed to win it, but because of what happened, his push was stopped. Even though he eventually did win it the year after in 1997, it was because of Triple H's punishment that Stone Cold Steve Austin won the King of the Ring in 1996, and Austin 316 was born. So everything happens for a reason. Now, after we talk about kayfabe, now it's time to discuss the territories. And kayfabe has a big role in the territories. So wrestling back in the day was broken into territories. Different cities had different promotions. You had a promotion in St. Louis, in Chicago, in Toronto, Canada, in Montreal, Quebec, in Texas, in Minnesota, in you name it, there was a territory. In New York, of course, that was Vince McMahon Sr. Well, he started in Washington with the Capitol Wrestling, out of Washington. Then he ended up growing. But wrestlers, they would go into different territories, and they would circle the territories, to get exposure. Now, eventually, the National Wrestling Alliance was formed, and in 1948, it was formed. And it was formed, and by Billy Corgan. So in 1948, Paul Pinky George, rather, a professional wrestler and promoter from the U.S. Midwest, founded the National Wrestling Alliance with the backing of 6 other promoters: Al Haft, Tony Stecker out of Minnesota, which Vern Gagne would buy out the Steckers, Harry Light, Orville Brown, Don Owen, and Sam Muchnick out of St. Louis. And the concept of the NWA was to consolidate the championships of those regional companies into one true world championship of professional wrestling, whose holder would be recognized worldwide. The newly formed NWA board of directors decided that Orville Brown, will become the first ever NWA heavyweight champion. Now, of course, Sam Muchnick was one of the original promoters for the NWA and Lou Thesz's booker. And of course, Lou Thesz became the world heavyweight champion. Now, there was different controversies in the National Wrestling Alliance, because the National Wrestling Alliance was formed so that in North America, they would recognize one world champion. All the territories got together. But of course, the territories wanted their guy to be the world heavyweight champion. One such instance happened on January 24th, 1963 at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. Lou Thesz defeated Buddy Rogers. In a one-fall match, was declared NWA World Heavyweight Champion for the third and final time. However, after the event, Vince McMahon Jr. and Toots Mondt of the Capital Wrestling Corporation refused to recognize the title change, since Thesz was not a strong draw in their Northeast territory. And of course, they then withdrew the Capital Wrestling Corporation from the NWA, and as a result, McMahon and Toots Mondt formed the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, the WWF, of course, later known as WWF and WWE, with Buddy Rogers as its first world champion in April 1963. Although both Gagne and McMahon promoted their own world champions, their promotions continued to have representatives on the NWA's board of directors and regularly exchanged talent within the NWA promotions during that time. So what ended up happening is that the Capital Wrestling Corporation, Vince McMahon Sr. and Toots Mondt, pulled out of the National Wrestling Alliance because, as I mentioned, each territory wanted their guy to be the world heavyweight champion. And Vince McMahon felt that Lou Thesz wouldn't be a big draw in the Northeast because he was known in the South and the West, and he wouldn't be able to draw on that champion. And of course, when there's too many cooks in the kitchen, it's not going to work. And eventually it blew up. Another story happened that Vern Gagne wrestled Lou Thesz 3 times and couldn't win the championship. There was a promoter in Chicago who wanted Lou Thesz to be the world heavyweight, rather Vern Gagne to be the world heavyweight champion. And Sam Muchnick in St. Louis wanted Lou Thesz because the other territories felt that if the Chicago promoter got his way and Gagne was the champion, then the Chicago promoter would be able to control Vern Gagne. So they never put the World Heavyweight Championship on Vern Gagne. So Vern Gagne bought out the Steckers, Tony Stecker in Minnesota, and formed the American Wrestling Association. And then you had three promotions that were in North America, like the 3 big territories. You had the American Wrestling Association in the upper mid east and west, because they were going out of Minnesota. They had Winnipeg. They had a whole bunch of other cities where they were on the Dumont, where they actually had TV. Vern Gagne managed to get TV rights. In the South, you had the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA, with such promotions as Jim Crockett, which ended up coming up from them, Georgia Championship Wrestling, the WCCW, which was the Von Erich promotion, Fritz Von Erich. You had Mid-South Wrestling, which was the territory which Jim Ross got his start as an announcer, which was the territory of Cowboy Bill Watson. You had multiple territories. And then to the northeast, New York, Washington, that area, Philadelphia, you had the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, Vince McMahon Jr.'s territory, senior rather. So the three of them competed. Now, I don't want to get into the three different territories and the stories of those territories today. I will tell you the AWA was a big territory, could have been either at the same level, equal to the WWF or the WWF, if they had pushed the right wrestlers and they had done the right stuff. Vern was a great promoter, but there was things that he could have done differently, that he could have accelerated the AWA, and it could have been at the level of WWF. One such thing, and I'll get into that when we talk about AEW in the future. Sorry, AWA in the future. He let Hulk Hogan go. So, and also the NWA will eventually talk about the NWA and how eventually Jim Crockett Promotions was the major territory, and the becomings of WCW and how Ted Turner got in the business and everything. But I just wanted to explain a little bit of the territories, that when you have too many cooks in the kitchen, it's not going to work. And that's why the NWA, a lot of promotions left, and it made for great competition and great stories when certain territories had to get together to try and try and compete with Vince McMahon, who had, a master plan with the wrestling business, who had the master plan, was an innovator. So what we're going to do right now is I want to go over and to explain the 25 very best wrestling territories before the World Wrestling Federation and World Wrestling Entertainment. So at number 25, Southwest Championship Wrestling out of San Antonio, Texas. They were based in the San Antonio area. Unlike most territorial promotions, they never became a member of the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA. They aired fights Sunday mornings at 11 on the USA Network starting in 1982. But unfortunately, a bloody match between Joe Blanchard, who was Tully Blanchard's father at the time. Tully Blanchard and Bob Sweeten was too much for the USA Network. They refused to air the program, and the time slot was given to, surprise, the World Wrestling Federation. The promotion was short-lived because of poor attendance and the national expansion of the WWF and Jim Crockett Promotions. Eventually, Blanchard sold the promotion to Texas All-Star Wrestling, which was TASW in 1985. But besides Tully Blanchard, other notable wrestlers that were in that territory included Adrian Adonis, Tom Pritchard, the Sheepherders, which were known now as the Bushwhackers, Luke and Butch, and Ravishing Rick Rude. Coming in at number 24 was Smoky Mountain Wrestling. That was a great territory. In 1991, Jim Cornette founded Smoky Mountain Wrestling in Tennessee, the last wrestling territory ever created. Cornette had roots in the National Wrestling Alliance and didn't want the territorial system to die. He promoted in Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia, West Virginia, and Virginia. After Eastern Championship Wrestling, the ECW left the NWA in 1994. Smoky Mountain Wrestling joined the NWA and held a tournament to crown the new NWA World Heavyweight Champion. The late Chris Candido won. Because of a decline in territory wrestling at the time, Smoky Mountain Wrestling had a working agreement with the World Wrestling Federation. Many who wrestled in Smoky Mountain Wrestling would become the stars in the late 90s in the WWF, the WCW, and Extreme Championship Wrestling. Bob Holly, Balls Mahoney, Chris Jericho, Al Snow, Kane, D'Lo Brown, Sonny, Chris Candido, which was Skip, in the WWE. Sonny, Lance Storm, and Road Dogg, to name a few, were in that promotion. Cornette finally decided to shut down in December of 1995 and work full-time with the WWF. And now, of course, the WWF owns Smoky Mountain Wrestling Archive. And number 23, International Championship Wrestling in Kentucky. International Championship Wrestling promotion was founded in 1978 by Angelo Poffo in the Kentucky area. Angelo Poffo is the father of the late Angelo Poffo is the father of the late Randy Macho Man Savage and the late Lanny Poffo. It was created to rival Southeastern Championship Wrestling based in Tennessee and even acquired several of their top talents in 1980. Of course, the main stars of the promotion were Poffo's sons, Lanny and Randy. They had success as Leapin' Lanny Poffo and, of course, the Macho Man Randy Savage. Apart from those two, only one other man held the ICW World Heavyweight Championship, a little-known wrestler called Paul Christie. Other notable wrestlers in the promotion were the Orton brothers, Barry and Bob Jr., Ox Baker, Rugged Ronnie Garvin, the Sheik, the original Sheik, and a young Miss Elizabeth. In 1984, due to poor attendance, that territory was sold to Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett. They merged it with their Continental Wrestling Association, where Randy Savage went on to become a big star. And number 22, World Championship Wrestling, Australia, New Zealand, and Asia. Yes, World Championship Wrestling was founded in 1964 by Jim Barnett in Australia and represented much of NWA's Asian and Oceania territory. Before they joined the NWA, they were a member of the International Wrestling Alliance, a governing body created by Barnett. After merging, IWA Championship belts became NWA regional belts. Andre the Giant, Abdullah the Butcher, Killer Kowalski, Haystacks Calhoun, and Ox Baker were big stars there. In 1978, WCW ceased operations. The name, however, stayed alive for many years by becoming the name of Georgia Championship Wrestling's TV show. The number 21, Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre Mexico. Consejo Mundial de Lucha Libre was founded in 1933 by Salvador Lutheroth as Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre. Quickly, it became the premier Lucha Libre promotion in the world, thanks to legendary Mexican wrestler and father of the late Eddie Guerrero, Gory Guerrero. In the early 1970s, Lutheroth left the company to his son Chavo. Meanwhile, the former EMLL wrestler Ray Mendoza was forming a rivalry called Universal Wrestling Promotion. EMLL eventually joined the National Wrestling Alliance and became the NWA's Mexican territory. Due to the national expansion of the World Wrestling Federation in the early 1980s, they soon withdrew from the NWA and changed their name to Consejo Mundial de Lucha Libre. CMLL is still around today as the world's oldest wrestling promotion. Now, World Wrestling Association in Indiana and Southern Illinois. NWA Indianapolis was a long-time promotion run by Jim Barnett, another one run by Jim Barnett. But when he left to start up WCW in Australia, he sold it to Wilbur Snyder and American Wrestling Association wrestler Dick the Bruiser. In 1964, Snyder and the Bruiser renamed NWA Indianapolis, Indiana, to the World Wrestling Association. Instead of becoming a member of the NWA, they joined the Minnesota promotion AWA. They received many of the AWA's top stars at the time, Vern Gagne, The Crusher, and Baron von Raschke. In the 1980s, the WWA was home to a young Scott Reckensteiner who would go on to achieve fame as Scott Steiner. After the World Wrestling Federation went national in the 1980s and started buying out all the regional promotions, the WWA tried to make a go of it themselves, but low attendance and lost talent to the WWF caused them to fold in 1978. The USWA comes in at 19. The United States Wrestling Association was the southern states. In 1989, the United States Wrestling Association was formed by the merging of Jerry Jarrett's Continental Wrestling Association and Fritz von Erich's World Class Championship Wrestling. Jarrett promoted shows in Tennessee, Texas, Kentucky, Indiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Missouri. Because of the changes in the wrestling business in the late 80s and the early 90s, the USWA had a working relationship with Vince McMahon and the WWF. When Jerry Lawler signed with the WWF, many of the WWF stars wrestled in the USWA and kept it alive. WWF stars who often competed in the USWA were Owen Hart, Bret Hart, Razor Ramon, Shawn Michaels, and Lex Luger. Of course, there was in the Royal Rumble 1996, there was an AWA star. It was Eddie Gilbert's brother, Dougie Gilbert. So there was a working relationship. It was also the promotion where 23-year-old Flex Cavana got his start, now better known as, of course, The Rock. After the Monday Night War started in 1995, the USWA failed to stay relevant. Poor attendance, lack of talent, and subpar venues led to Lawler buying out Jarrett and selling the company to a business who shut down the company in 1997. Eastern Championship Wrestling out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. What became known as Extreme Championship Wrestling was founded as Tri-State Wrestling by Joel Goodhart in 1989. He sold it to Philadelphia promoter Todd Gordon in 1992, who renamed it Eastern Championship Wrestling. Stars of ECW were Eddie Gilbert, Shane Douglas, Too Cold Scorpio, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Don Morocco, Tito Santana, The Sandman, Sabu, and Terry Funk. Since ECW was part of the National Wrestling Alliance, Jim Crockett asked Gordon to hold a tournament to crown a new NWA World Heavyweight Champion. They did this in August of 1994 in what became one of the most memorable moments in wrestling history. Shane Douglas won the tournament and was handed the title. He threw it down and in a very rare shoot promo said he didn't want to be a champion of an association that died 5 years ago, referring to when WCW was created. The E in ECW eventually changed from Eastern to Extreme. The promotion went national and revolutionized the business with their hardcore style before shutting down in 2001. Number 17, All-Star Wrestling, Vancouver, Canada, Northwestern Washington. All-Star Wrestling was founded in 1960 by Ron Fenton as a successor to his big-time wrestling promotion in Vancouver. In 1962, they earned a TV deal when future NWA World Champion and Canada's most popular wrestler, Gene Knitsky, became a regular on the roster. ASW was a longtime affiliate of the NWA going back to the BTW days. In 1966, though, when Gene Knitsky became the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, ASW became a major force in the Pacific Northwest scene. He, along with Sandor Kovacs, bought out Ron Fenton of ASW in 1968, and they joined forces with the Pacific Northwest Wrestling promoter Don Owen to promote in the area. They formed Northwest Wrestling Promotions as a parent company for both promotions. Big stars of the ASW were Roddy Piper, Don Morocco, Stan the Man Stasiak, Hawk, Rick Martel, as well as Kaninsky himself. In 1977, Kovacs sold a share of the promotion to Canadian wrestler Al Tomko. In the 1980s, the company declined with the aging Tomko. He pushed himself as the promoter's top star despite his lost ability. In 1983, Kaninsky left the promotion and sold his shares to Tomko, after which Tomko withdrew ASW from the NWA and created his own wrestling alliance called Universal Wrestling Alliance. This move did nothing to stop ASW's demise, and Tomko shut down the promotion in 1989. Number 6, New Japan Wrestling was created in 1972 by former Japan Wrestling Alliance star Antonio Inoki. Yeah, Inoki, and for the following 14 years, it was a big part of the NWA. The main reason they joined the NWA was to gain control of the NWA's smaller titles, the junior heavyweight and middleweight titles. They left the NWA in 1986, but have had a working agreement with the NWA to this day, getting promotion of the similar titles as well as producing stars such as Masahiro Chono, Hiroshi Hase, Shinya Hashimoto, The Great Muta, and Tatsuma Fujinami with Chono Hashimoto. The NJPW is still alive today and is considered the WWE of Japan. It holds off competition from AJPW as well as numerous other Japanese promotions that have established in recent years. And in 1972 is when legendary Japanese wrestler the Giant Baba left the JPWA and created his own promotion, All Japan Pro Wrestling, in Tokyo. And originally, the governing body was Pacific Wrestling Federation, which was established by Baba. But in 1973, they joined the NWA, with the PWF titles becoming regional titles. AJPW became the NWA's main Japanese territory as JPWA folded the same year. Giant Baba himself would become the promotion's biggest star in the early years, winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship 3 times. Some of the top Japanese wrestlers to come out of the AJPW were Jumbo Tsurata, Generico Tenru, Matsuhari Misuwa, and Kenta Kobashi. In 1986, AJPW left the NWA and began its battle with New Japan Pro Wrestling. The battle rages on to this day. Number 14, Central States Wrestling, Missouri, Kansas, and Iowa. Heart of America, sports attraction was founded in 1948 by the first ever NWA World Champion, Orville Brown. As the Midwest Wrestling Association, he pointed out of Kansas, Missouri, and promoted and Iowa. When he joined the NWA, it was seen as one of the most important promotions in NWA history. Harley Race was in that promotion. Promoter Bob Geigel took over in 1958. And in 1986, Geigel sold the promotion to Jim Crockett Jr. of Jim Crockett Promotions. He ran the company separate instead of incorporating it into Jim Crockett Promotions. Geigel bought it back in 1987. He decided to rename the promotion World Wrestling Alliance in a failed attempt to go national. St. Louis Wrestling Club is at number 13, known as Sam Muchnick Sports Attractive. Was founded in 1959 and ran until 1985 in the Missouri area. It was founded by Sam Muchnick, a former boxing promoter who served 2 terms as the NWA president. And 10-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion Harley Race had a minority share in the promotion. Other notable wrestlers in St. Louis were Bulldog Bob Brown, Dick Murdoch, Dick the Bruiser, Bob Orton Jr., Pat O'Connor, Mike George, and Rufus R. Jones, Ric Flair, Lou Thez, the Von Erichs, Jack Briscoe, Bob Backlund, and the Funks. So they had a weekly show called Wrestling at the Chase, considered one of the best wrestling programs. It was canceled in 1983, just 2 years before the promotion shut down. General States Wrestling promoter and former NWA Central States champion Bob Geigel purchased the promotion in 1982 before selling it to Jim Crockett Promotions in 1985. Coming in at number 12, Southern Championship Wrestling, which was founded by Roy Welch and Buddy Fuller in 1954 when they purchased part of Leroy McGurk's Tri-State Wrestling promotion. Notable wrestlers under the SCW were Arn Anderson, Mr. Wrestling 2, Bullet Bob Armstrong, and Hulk Hogan, known then as Terry the Hulk Bollea. And he ended up selling the promotion territory to David Woods, who owned a TV station late in 1989. The promotion ceased operations because of the national expansion of wrestling and the inability to compete. Now, before we head to the top 10, number 11, Maple Leaf Wrestling out of Toronto. Maple Leaf Wrestling was founded in 1930 at the Queensberry Athletic Club by boxing promoter Jack Corcoran in the Toronto area. In 1931, he took control of Maple Leaf Gardens and thus took control of wrestling all over Toronto. In 1939, he stepped down and handed the promotion over to John and Frank Tunney. Frank, however, gained full control when his brother John died 2 months later. He renamed the promotion Maple Leaf Wrestling and then joined the NWA in 1949. The promotion's biggest star was one-time NWA World Champion Whipper Billy Watson, who, despite not being favored by Tunney in the early years, became one of wrestling's biggest draws. Tunney's claimed that throughout his main event career in Toronto, he drew over 5 million fans. The Sheik was a huge draw in that promotion. In 1978, Tunney became partners with Jim Crockett Jr., the engineer when Frank's son Eddie and John's son Jack took over the promotion in 1983. Within a year, they had left the NWA and joined forces with Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. The WWF began using the MLW name when they toured Canada to draw local crowds, as Jack Tunney became an on-air personality in the WWF. The president of the World Wrestling Federation, Jack Tunney, at that point. MLW finally closed in 1986. WWE owns all of MLW's video archive. And so before we go back to the top 10 wrestling promotions, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what just shared with you. So a lot of those promotions, as you could see, had ties with the NWA, had ties with Vince McMahon. But the key is these promotions, which you'll see in the future on the SmackDown 2 report, they closed as a result of the expansion of Vince McMahon and the WWE, Vince McMahon Jr., who bought out the territory from his father. Now, the thing is that Vince McMahon would go to different territories, taking talent away from those territories and building the WWF. And these small promotions couldn't compete and shut down. So there were so many, as you saw, they folded because of the expansion of the WWE, because they left the NWA. So these territories, they suffered and had to shut down because of the rise of Vince McMahon. So what I'm going to do, we're going to go with the top 10 now wrestling promotions. And I don't know if you could see me, if the camera, I'm sure you can still. Pacific Wrestling was founded in 1925 by Herb Owen, who promoted boxing and wrestling in wrestling in that area. It was Oregon and Washington. And after Herb Owen died, he took his son Don took over and was one of the first promoters to showcase women's wrestling. So it is very it was he took over when the NWA was created, though, in 1948. PNW was one of the first promotions that joined that particular promotion, and they joined that particular promotion, and they joined that promotion, and they really joined that. They joined. They were one of the first promotions that joined. Actually, they were one of the best in the country, and in 1953 made their TV debut. In the 1960s, they hit their stride when they headlined Lou Thez and NWA World Heavyweight Champion Gene Kiniski, which drew 16,000 people. They lost their TV deal, though, in 1967, but were still doing well. And in the 1970s, brought in Roddy Piper, Jesse Ventura, Dutch Savage, Lonnie Main, Blackjack Haynes, Billy Jack Haynes, Buddy Rose, and Jimmy Snuka to the promotion. Buddy Rose was one of their main draws in the 1970s and early 80s, even wrestling there on his days off from the World Wrestling Federation. In the 1980s, they began promoting in Washington, and they got another TV deal in 1982, which aired on Friday nights. They had a talent exchange with World Class Championship Wrestling in Texas, and two of Portland's wrestlers, Chris Adams and King Parsons, became big stars for Von Erich in the WCWA. In the late 1980s, the national expansion of the WWF, again in World Championship Wrestling, hurt PNW. Also, numerous laws in Portland prevented them from improving the promotion. In 1992, Don Owen sold the company. At number 9, Stampede Wrestling in Calgary. Of course, Eastern Vancouver and Montana, but big in Calgary. Stampede Wrestling was founded in 1948 by Canadian wrestler and star Stu Hart, who was the father and patriarch of the Hart family in the Calgary area as Klondike Wrestling. It became a member of the NWA and landed a TV deal in 1957. Their show was one of the most popular wrestling shows in the world until 1989, when they closed down. Stampede was home to a number of stars, considered some of the best wrestlers in the world, most of whom were trained at the Dungeon, a popular school owned and run by Stu Hart. Bret the Hitman Hart, Owen Hart, Davey Boy Smith, Jim D'Anville Neidhart, the Dynamite Kid, Chris Benoit, and Brian Pillman were a couple of the stars who honed their skills there and started out in Stampede. Andre the Giant was also a big star in Stampede, where he wrestled for much of the 1970s. In 1982, they withdrew from the NWA and ran independently until they were bought by the World Wrestling Federation in 1984 to improve the WWF's marketability in Canada. In 1985, the WWF sold Stampede back to the Hart family, who ran it until 1989 when the TV show got canceled. Bruce and Keith Hart reopened in 1999 and it still runs today as an independent promotion. Mid-South Wrestling in Oklahoma and Texas. The Universal Wrestling Federation was founded in the 1950s by a retired wrestler called Leroy McGurk as NWA Tri-State and promoted shows in Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Cowboy Bill Watts was one of the major stars during the early days. He eventually bought the company in 1979 and renamed it Mid-South Wrestling. And they were one of the only few territories to not be part of the NWA, though NWA titles were still defended there. The biggest stars in Mid-South Wrestling was the Junkyard Dog, the Fabulous Freebirds, the Midnight Express, Sting, Shane Douglas, Rick Steiner, Eddie Gilbert, Steve Williams, which was, Steve Williams, the Rock and Roll Express, Bill Watts, Donnie Hodge, Irish Mike Clancy, and Ted DiBiase, Dr. Death. With the promotion only a year old, MSW Michael Hayes wrestled the Junkyard Dog, and the match drew 30,000 fans. Bill Watts saw what the World Wrestling Federation was doing and decided he wanted the company to go national under the United Wrestling Federation. But UWF was unable to compete with Jim Crockett Promotions and WWF, and Watts ended up selling to Crockett in 1987. All the talent was buried except Sting, Rick Steiner, the Fabulous Freebirds, the Rock and Roll Express, and Shane Douglas. The UWF is one of the few defunct promotions whose video archives doesn't belong to the World Wrestling Federation Entertainment, WWE. Georgia Championship Wrestling at number 7. Georgia Championship Wrestling was founded in 1944 by local promoter Paul Jones, originally known as ABC Booking. It soon changed its name to Mid-South Sports until it was renamed Georgia Championship Wrestling in 1967. Their shows in Atlanta, they ran shows in the Atlanta area every Friday until 1971 when they made their debut on TV, hosted by legendary Gordon Soley, one of Ted Turner's TV stations, WTBS. Paul Jones ran the company for the best part of 30 years before falling ill and handing it over to his booker, Ray Gunkel, in 1970, who ran it for 2 years before he died of a heart attack after a match with the legendary Ox Baker. For 2 years, the promotion was in limbo as Gunkel's wife took all the GCW wrestlers to make her own promotion, but when that failed, they went back to Georgia under the tutelage of promoter Jim Barnett in 1976. In 1976, GCW made its debut on satellite TV, and it was the first National Wrestling Alliance promotion to be broadcast nationwide. It was one of the main shows keeping WTBS, the station it was on, alive. In 1982, they were forced to change their TV show's name to World Championship Wrestling to make it more appealing to fans. Jim Barnett was forced out of GCW in 1983 as it was taken over by the Briscoe brothers and Ole Anderson. In his quest to end the old territorial system of wrestling, Vince McMahon bought the promotion and his TV time slot in 1984. After the World Wrestling Federation bombed on WTBS due to the attendance of Georgia Championship Wrestling preferring athletic wrestling to the cartoonish storylines that the WWF showed, Vince sold the promotion at the time slot to Jim Crockett Promotions in 1985. The WWE, however, now owns the Georgia Championship Wrestling tape library. Tommy Rich, Bobby Shane, the Masked Superstar, which is Axe from Demolition, and the Assassins were popular stars in the GCW, with NWA World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair also making regular stops, as well as the Briscoes, Ole Anderson, and the Funks. WWE now owns the rights to GCW video archives. At number 6, World Class Championship Wrestling. The World Class Championship Wrestling was founded in 1960 by Fritz von Erich as the NWA Big Time Wrestling. They promoted shows in Texas, mainly in the Dallas area. Fritz von Erich was the main star in the early years until his son started to debut in the mid-70s, as well as the Fabulous Freebirds, Chris Adams, King Parsons, Jose Lothario, Bruiser Brody, Gino Hernandez, which is Gorgeous Gino, the Midnight Express, and it was where a young Shawn Michaels, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Scott Hall got their start. They taped their weekly shows at the Sportatorium in Dallas. The night they taped their show would change over the years. The promotion was in its prime between the years of 1981 and 1986. Legendary feud between the Von Erichs and the Freebirds were a staple of the era, following the death of one of their top stars, Gino Hernandez, and the NWA World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair no longer being booked in the WCCW. They withdrew from the National Wrestling Alliance in 1986 and changed their name to World Class Wrestling Association. Following the deaths of Hernandez, as well as the deaths of two of the Von Erich brothers and the national expansion of the World Wrestling Federation and Jim Crockett Promotions, the WCWA began to lose their popularity. It sold to Continental Wrestling Association owner Jerry Jarrett in 1989, and his attempt to go national as the United States Wrestling Association, as we heard before, which lasted 8 years, failed to go national. The top 5 now. The top 5 wrestling promotions. We're going to get to that. And we're also going to have a tribute to the late, great Sabu. And as you saw in the top 5, a lot of these territories were bought out by other territories trying to compete with Vince McMahon, but it didn't work. No matter what you did, Vince McMahon reigned supreme because he had a knack for the wrestling business. He had the creative ideas. He had the creativity to keep the promotion alive and to keep it alive. And even when WCW beat them for 83 weeks, they still managed to come back because Vince McMahon was an innovator. He was a great, promoter, but he was the man that started and created sports entertainment, and said, yes, wrestling is a form of entertainment. It's a sport, but it's a form of entertainment. It's not the wrestling business. It's sports entertainment. So all these territories tried to compete. They tried to sell to each other, which we'll see eventually, but that didn't work. So now let's go to the top 5 territories before WWE or WWF. Number 5, the Continental Wrestling Association, which ran in Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and Mississippi. That was founded in 1977 by Total Nonstop Action TNA co-founder Jerry Jarrett. He ran the promotion with WWE Hall of Famer Jerry Lawler. They promoted the shows out of the states of Tennessee and Kentucky. NWA Mid-America was the original Tennessee promotion that was founded in the 40s, which also ran shows in Alabama and Kentucky areas and focused mainly on tag team wrestling. After years of bickering by co-owners Jerry Jarrett and Nick Gulas, they decided to split the promotion in two. Jerry Jarrett ended up creating his own promotion while NWA shut down and forced Gulas to retire. They aired their TV shows on Monday night in Memphis, which drew full houses, often headlined by co-owner Jerry the King Lawler, who was a 52-time Memphis Wrestling Southern Heavyweight Champion while in promotion. 57 overall. Hulk Hogan was a regular performer there before superstardom, as well as Jimmy Valiant, Jackie Fargo, Sputnik Monroe, Tojo Yamamoto, Kamala, King Kong Bundy, Randy Savage, Jimmy Hart, and a very young Jeff Jarrett. That's the promotion that Andy Kaufman came in. Jerry Lawler and Jimmy Hart feud was probably the biggest feud in the promotion throughout the 80s. The feud consisted of Hart bringing in numerous heels to face Lawler over the years before he signed for the WWF. Actor Andy Kaufman was a big part of the promotion in the early 80s, where he also had a memorable feud with Lawler that went mainstream. After the national expansions of the WWF, the WCW, the CWA left the NWA in 1989 and joined the American Wrestling Association in an attempt to help them compete with the WWF and WCW. When that failed, Jerry Jarrett bought Fritz Von Erich's World Class Championship Wrestling and merged it with the CWA to create the USWA, which wasn't a wrestling territory per se, despite only promoting shows in Tennessee and Texas. It was Jarrett's attempt to go national. Over the years, independent promoters have opened in Tennessee and have used the acronym of the CWA, but will never reach the popularity of the original CWA. Number 4, a great territory, Championship Wrestling from Florida, which was founded by Cowboy Clarence Luttrell in 1949 and was based out of Florida. They became a member of the NWA, and in 1961, wrestler Eddie Graham bought into the promotion and took it over completely in 1971. CWF became a major promotion in the NWA because of Eddie Graham's 2 terms as the NWA president. It was home to many top NWA stars like the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, baby, Jack Briscoe, Lex Luger, Barry Windham, Boris Malenko, who was the father of Dean Malenko, Eddie Graham, and Kevin Sullivan, as well as other NWA stars who wrestled there on a frequent basis. Kevin Sullivan was an icon down there with his heel stable, Army of Darkness. In 1985, Eddie Graham committed suicide, leaving the promotion to Hiro Matsuda and Duke Teomuka, who bought into the promotion in the 1960s. The promotion began losing money and merged with the Jim Crockett Promotions in 1987 in an attempt at competing with Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. The WWF owns the CWF video archives from their TV show, and in 2007 opened a developmental wrestling promotion named for the Championship Wrestling in CWF's honor. Number 3, American Wrestling Association, the AWA, in Minnesota and the North Central States. The American Wrestling Association's roots go back to 1933, when it was known as the Minnesota Boxing and Wrestling Club, founded by Anton Stecker. In 1952, he sold part of it to Wally Carbo before he died in 1954. Carbo then took over the promotion with wrestling star Vern Gagne. Gagne was a popular wrestling star in the 1950s and wanted to become the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. But due to politics in the National Wrestling Alliance, he was never given the opportunity. And in 1959, Stecker's son Dennis sold part of the promotion he kept when he died to Carbo and Gagne. In 1960, after trying and failing one more time to become the NWA World Champion, Gagne and Carbo withdrew the MBWC from the NWA with other nearby territories to form the American Wrestling Association. The AWA was one of the biggest promotions in the United States, and because they grew the territory to Illinois, California, and Chicago, among other states, they were question marks on whether to consider them a territory or not. Vern Gagne and Nick Bockwinkel were the biggest stars in the promotion, as well as Mad Dog Vachon, The Crusher, and Dr. X. In the early 1980s, however, things started to go downhill when, among other things, they refused to build the company around Hulk Hogan. See? That's what I had mentioned. Lost half of their talent to the World Wrestling Federation and focused too much on wrestling and wrestlers way past their prime. They joined forces with the NWA without becoming a member to form Pro Wrestling USA with a couple of promotions to compete with Vince McMahon. But when that failed, it was only a matter of time that the promotion was going to call it a day. It floundered for the rest of the 1980s, and even though they hosted one pay-per-view, their 30-year-old TV show was canceled in 1990, and a year later, they closed. WWE owns all the video archive, and in 2006 brought out a DVD in their honor. Number 2, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. That was before. What is now the WWE was founded in 1952 by Jess McMahon and Toots Monk as Capital Wrestling Corporation, and was based out of the northeastern area, mainly New York and Connecticut. They joined the NWA in 1953, but years later, Jess McMahon died, so Mont brought in Jess's son, Vincent J. McMahon. During the rest of the 50s, they became very powerful within the NWA and controlled most of its booking, and they grew their territory to Pittsburgh, Maine, and Washington, D.C. Controversy arose in 1961 when Mont booked Buddy Rogers as the NWA World Champion, but rarely let him leave the CWC. In 1963, after Rogers lost the title to Lou Thez, the CWC left the NWA and renamed it the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, bringing Rogers with them and making him the world champion. But due to a heart attack, he lost the belt to Bruno Sammartino, who became the promotion's top star. By the 1970s, they were selling out Madison Square Garden with stars like Bruno Sammartino, Killer Kowalski, Freddie Blassie, Pedro Morales, Buddy Rogers, Antonino Rocca, Argentina Rocca, Bob Backlund, and Billy Graham, superstar Billy Graham. In 1979, it was renamed the World Wrestling Federation, and 3 years later was bought out by Vincent K. McMahon, the son of Vincent J. McMahon's man. He had aspirations of stepping away from the old territorial systems and going national, which happened in the mid-'80s due to Hulk Hogan, WrestleMania, and holding events all over the country. Vince would achieve what he set out to and eliminate territorial wrestling, and took wrestling places it never went before eliminating any promoter and promotion who tried to compete with him along the way. And the number one promotion before WWF and WWE, Jim Crockett Promotions, the Mid-Atlantic States. Jim Crockett was founded by Jim Crockett Sr. in 1931, who also promoted other events like basketballs, concerts, and plays. They joined the NWA in 1952 and promoted shows in the Carolinas and Virginia. He died in 1973, and his sons Jim Jr. and David Crockett took over the company, with Jim Jr. becoming the owner. They began using the name Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling as the promotion's primary name for their TV shows. Prior to the younger Crockett's taking over the company, it was more of a tag team promotion, but they steered away from that while still having some tag team wrestling. The JCP were the first territory to actually expand, promoting shows in Tennessee, West Virginia, Georgia, Ohio, and even further north in New York and Canada. Jim Crockett Promotions was seen as the main promotion of the NWA, and many of the top stars like the Nature Boy Ric Flair, the Anderson brothers, Gene, Lars, and Ole, and Arn Anderson, Wahoo McDaniel, the High Chief, Johnny Valentina, and Paul Jones mainly wrestled there. As the NWA World Heavyweight Championship was mainly contested there, the promotion's main title, the NWA Mid-Atlantic Championship, was seen as a secondary title. Crockett saw what Vince McMahon was doing and was the only territory able to keep up with him, especially after purchasing Georgia Championship Wrestling's rights from him and airing the products on the WTBS. In 1983, Crockett became the first wrestling promoter to host a pay-per-view, Starrcade, which was hugely successful. Crockett wanted to go national like the World Wrestling Federation and bought out several fellow NWA promoters, which meant Jim Crockett Promotions became home to the other top NWA stars like Harley Race, the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, Magnum TA, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, Barry Windham, Lex Luger, and Sting. It was also where the legendary Four Horsemen began. Unfortunately, due to many factors such as the rise of Hulkamania, the career-ending injury of Magnum TA, moving away from where their loyal fans were located, subpar booking by the likes of Dusty Rhodes, and spending a ridiculous amount of money on jets to fly the roster around, they soon found out they were a couple of $1 million in the hole and sold the company to Ted Turner in 1988, which led Turner creating the national promotion World Championship Wrestling, who, after withdrawing from the NWA in 1993, almost put the WWF out of business in the late 1990s before folding in 2001. And of course, WWF owns all Jim Crockett Promotions and WCW video archives. So that is the top 25 territories. And, you know, like I said, there's a whole bunch of different stories. These promotions, when Jim Crockett Promotions rose and the World Championship Wrestling rose and WWE became popular, you know, then nationalized, and these territories couldn't compete. And so we'll even take a look more in depth into the territories and share the stories on the Smackdown Stew YouTube channel here on the Smackdown Stew Report. I'd like to take a minute and look back at the life and career of the late, great, homicidal, suicidal, genocidal, death-defying Sabu, who passed away over the weekend. There was some controversy about his passing, that he was given a drug to help him through the match. Of course, he was 60 because otherwise his body wouldn't let him wrestle. He passed away over the weekend at 60. Many tributes poured in from the WWE, one emotional one from the AEW, where Taz paid tribute in tears to Sabu. So we will take a look at that. Sabu, actually, he debuted in when he debuted in ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling. He actually was in a team with Taz, and then he ended up feuding with Taz. They made him come out in like Hannibal Lecter in a mask and chains on a dolly, to show how dangerous he was. This man would put his body through an unbelievable amount of pain. Unbelievable. He was one of the greatest hardcore wrestlers of all time, and he learned from the best, the Sheik. And I watched, and it's kind of fitting that the week that Sabu passed away was the same week that the Dark Side of the Ring aired their episode on the Sheik, the original Sheik. And to show you kayfabe at the beginning, because everything ties together, the Sheik would live his character everywhere, even at home His grandkids would call him Sheik. They wouldn't call him Grandpa. Or his kids would call him Sheik. He kept the kayfabe alive everywhere, and that's what he taught Sabu. Sabu didn't talk at the beginning because his uncle, the Sheik, told him not to because of kayfabe, and he was billed with the straight jacket and the chains and the Hannibal Lecter mask, to show how dangerous he was, and he had all sorts of feuds and bloody bloodbath, with the likes of Taz, Tommy Dreamer, Terry Funk, and unbelievable matches. Just blood. He would jump over, he would put a chair in the middle of the ring, jump from the chair over to the ropes into the crowd, go through tables, barbed wire, you name it, he did it. And the scars on his body were something else. You think Abdul the Butcher had scars on his head? Take a look at Taz. Sabu. Now, Sabu would, after ECW, made appearance. Well, he first started WWE in a dark match, and a tryout. Then he went to ECW. He had a stint in WCW, very short. He wrestled Mr. JL on one pay-per-view and also on a Monday Nitro. Eventually, going back to WCW, he made appearances in the indie circuit. He made appearances in TNA, and recently he last year showed up in the AEW to be a special guest referee in a match. Of course, took a bump and then had his last wrestling match about 2 or 3 weeks ago against Joey Janela in another wrestling promotion, and his death did spark controversy because, like I said, he was given a drug to make his, for his body, I guess to run on adrenaline, so his body can handle the bumps. And of course, he ended up passing away. So R.I.P. to the great hardcore legend Sabu. You'll be missed. Sabu passing away at age 60 last weekend. So before I go, I just want to tell you what's going to happen on the Smackdown Stu report. As you can see, I'm wearing my Jake the Snake Roberts DDT t-shirt that's signed by Jake the Snake Roberts. You can see on my shoulder over here. Actually, well, it's mirrored on my left shoulder. You're right. But he wasn't a nice guy. That's besides the point. Before I go, I'd like to just tell you what's going to be coming up on the SmackDown Stu YouTube channel, the SmackDown Stu report. We're going to look at different things in the wrestling business. Of course, the end of the month, there's 2 major things that happen, and we're going to definitely look into that. The first being when Scott Hall walked on to WCW after he left WWE, or WWF at the time, walked on to WCW, and thus eventually gave birth to the NWO. But that's when it started, at the end of this month. And of course, the end of the month, we're going to look at what is coming up on, and I can't believe it, the 29th anniversary of the death. Sorry, rather, no, not 29th. I do apologize. It's coming up on, and it's 1999, coming up on the 26th anniversary of the death of Owen Hart 26 years ago. The end of May 1999 at Over the Edge, Owen Hart was tragically killed when he was going to perform a stunt from the rafters of the Kemper Arena in St. Louis. And the clip, suddenly there was a malfunction with the safety clip, and he fell to his death. And that happened 26 years ago, the end of the month. So we'll take a look at that as well. Upcoming in the months coming, of course, the forming of the NWO, that famous 1996 bash at the beach, where, of course, we saw the biggest heel turn in the history of the business that nobody expected. And a lot of other things we'll take a look at. Of course, the Montreal Screwjob, me being from Montreal, at a later date. We will look at all kinds of things in old school wrestling, how the business was shaped, controversies, kayfabe, you name it. We will look at it and we will have a discussion. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the Smackdown Stew YouTube channel to know when I'll be going live with the next Smackdown Stew report. And we will be interactive. We will have an email address coming up. Check out the Facebook page, the Smackdown Stew YouTube channel. Great things to come. So that's it for me. Like I said, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel to know the next time that I'll be going live, more than likely next week. So please stay tuned to the Smackdown Stew YouTube channel. And I will say, ciao for now, wrestling fans.